welcome back to English Club on TV. We are your hosts. I'm Mr. Daryl.
I'm Miss Samantha, and today we will be discussing The Call of the Wild by Jack London.
And this is for grades 7, 8, and 9.
Let's begin.
Let's have a look at our agenda for today. We have a look at vocabulary, then we will look at the author, and then we'll look at a summary of the book.
Yes. After that, we'll discuss the characters, the setting, and main themes before concluding by reviewing what we learned and going over, of course, a little homework.
I do enjoy the homework we've been seeing.
Me too. Now, our first vocabulary word comes from the title of our book, and that word is wild. Now, wild, as an adjective, describes animals in a natural environment or a place without human civilization. And as a noun, it is the natural state of being.
The opposite of wild is domestic. And that is related to any kind of home environment. And when talking about animals, it means that they are tame, trained, and house pets.
Mm-hmm. Next, we will move away from the domestic and back to the wild with the word pack. Now, pack means a group of wild animals, especially wolves, who live and hunt together.
Our next noun is sled dog, a working dog that pulls sleds over long, snowy regions, usually carrying people, food, mail, and any kind of other goods.
Mm-hmm. And those long, snowy regions might be described as our next word, Daryl, which is harsh. Now, harsh means unpleasantly rough, cruel, or severe.
We have a verb next, and that is to beat. This is to hit someone or an animal over again with the purpose of hurting them or injuring them.
But our next word is more positive. It's resilient. And resilient means able to survive or recover quickly from difficult conditions. Some synonyms for resilient are tough and strong.
You can also be self-reliant, which is our next word, an adjective. It means to depend or rely only on yourself, your own powers of mind, your own resources, and so that you don't have to need the help of others.
Yeah. Please keep all of these words in mind throughout our lesson and, of course, when you read the book. Now, let's talk about our author, which of course we do to understand the book a bit better. Daryl, could you tell us a bit about our author for today?
It is Jack London, an American author from California, actually, from the US. It's not his real name, so his name is not Jack London. It is John Griffith Chaney. And he lived in the latter part of the 19th century, and he died in the early part of the 20th century. He started working at the age of 13, came from a poor family, but I think that situation taught him the benefits of hard work and never giving up. One particular thing that kind of makes me feel close to him is his love of books and reading. At one point they say he owned about 15,000 books.
Oh my gosh, 15,000 books. Wow, that is a lot of books. It's not just books, though, that he loved. He also loved animals and traveling, too, though he didn't have 15,000 animals. He was an animal activist and an adventurous man who loved nature and the wild. He was actually one of the first authors to achieve worldwide celebrity and earn a large fortune from writing. Now, let's look at one of the books that made him so rich and famous.
Let's start with a summary of The Call of the Wild. It begins when Buck, a big, happy dog, living an easy life as a pet in warm California, gets stolen from his comfortable home and sold into a difficult life of working as a sled dog in the freezing cold of Alaska and Canada.
And not only is the environment harsh in the Arctic, but many of the new characters that Buck meets on his adventures are very harsh too. Despite all this, Buck actually does a really good job as a sled dog. He's strong, smart, brave, resilient, self-reliant, and he has fantastic survival instincts.
Buck's incredible abilities as a sled dog make him very valuable, so he's sold many times throughout the book to different kinds of people, some more cruel than others. Finally, when Buck is with the worst owners yet, who starve and beat their dogs, a kind and experienced outdoorsman named John Thornton rescues him.
Yes, Thornton nurses Buck back to good health, and they grow very close, forming a special bond that many of us have with our own pets. But Buck's time with Thornton doesn't last very long, and Buck eventually, from the title, you'll know this, he answers the call of the wild by joining a wolf pack and leaving human civilization behind. So we talked about what happens. Now let's look at the who with our characters. Now, it's important to note that many of the characters in this book are animals who can communicate with each other, and they understand what's happening in the world around them. They understand the humans. But it is not a fantasy. It's not a fantasy book where the dogs can speak English with the humans. Not like Alice in Wonderland.
That's a very good point. Let's look at the main character, the protagonist, if you will, the hero. And that is Buck, the dog. He is a strong dog, as we've mentioned before. He's big and tough and adaptable. At an early age, he learns about the law of club and fang, which is a phrase straight from the book. And it means that he learns how life can be tough and cruel, but luckily he learns this well and he becomes resilient, so he doesn't fall from it. He is an adaptable dog, and he's happy as a pet with humans, just as he becomes happy as a wild animal in a wolf pack.
It's a good trait to have. Now that we've talked about the protagonist, let's look at one of our antagonists. That's Spitz. Now, Spitz has had a long career as a lead sled dog, but he's jealous of Buck's natural ability, and Spitz wants to prove himself by fighting Buck. The fight ends terribly for Spitz, though, and we see signs of Buck's change from a domestic animal into a wild one, as he uses his fangs to survive, beat Spitz, and become the new leader of the sled dog team.
Now, these were two dogs in the book. We move now to a wolf character in the book, the wild brother, as he is known. He is a wolf who befriends Buck in the wilds. This is Buck's first contact with the true wilderness of wolf life. The wild brother has no contact with society, and he in fact shows Buck a new kind of world. I think the wild brother in fact allows Buck to finally understand his true self.
That is a great character then, to understand your true self. Ooh. Now, let's move on to our only human character of the day, John Thornton. He is a skilled survivalist who understands and respects the wild. He's Buck's final owner, and they form a special bond. Unfortunately, near the end of the book, though, Thornton is killed by a tribe of Native Americans, and this is the event that really causes Buck to reject human civilization for good and turn to the wild life of a wolf. So we've talked about what happens. We've talked about who is in this story. Now let's turn to the setting so we can get to the when and the where.
Let's start with the when. So this centers on the year 1897, and it was the time of the Klondike Gold Rush. Now this is a time when gold was discovered in the Klondike, way up north in the Yukon, at the very end of the 19th century. Gold was discovered and many became wealthy, but quite a few stayed poor as well. This has been immortalized in films, literature, and plays, and so on. But the important thing for the book, and for us as readers, is that the Klondikers, the gold hunters, needed a lot of things taken with them. So they needed, food and shelter and all sorts of equipment. And this is where Buck comes in. They needed Buck to be one of the sled dogs that takes things up to the north.
Very interesting. Now that brings us to the where. We're in the Yukon Territory in this novel, and that is in the northwestern part of what is now Canada. These were harsh and freezing climates that was difficult to survive in. It was full of new travelers, the gold hunters, of course, so society was very different here. Small towns would pop up overnight only to be abandoned weeks later. Also, there weren't a lot of women and there weren't a lot of families in this region, so it was a male-dominated society that was halfway between wild life and domestic life, which I think parallels Buck's own journey of being in the middle of the wild and the domestic.
Very good. You're hinting at one of the main themes of the book.
Yes, which brings us, of course, to the main themes. As you'll remember, the main themes are the main ideas of our story.
I think we should talk about this main theme first, the conflict between civilization and the wilderness or wildness. This book ultimately is about two parts in Buck the dog. He wants to be loved by his human world, but it doesn't always work out. He meets cruelty from the human world. Later in the book, he discovers the wolf world and the call of the wild. He realizes that his true home belongs out there. But the thing is, he has learned much by being with humans, so it wasn't all a waste.
And that's a good point, what you said about learning in a different group of people, in this group of humans, which brings us to our next theme of the individual in the group. So throughout the novel, Buck finds himself in many different groups, like the sled dogs, the wolf pack, and different humans. And each time Buck joins a new group, he must figure out his role in it, in this new dynamic. All of the groups bring out a new side of Buck's individual identity, shaping him into the dog he finally becomes. And I think this helps readers learn that the people who we surround ourselves with can really influence our own personal identities.
That's a very good lesson to learn.
It really is. And there are so many more themes to discover in this book, but we're almost out of time, so let's review. First, we talked about the author, Jack London. Then we moved on to a summary of Buck's struggle to survive in the Arctic. We talked about 4 of our characters, then moved on to the setting, the Yukon Territory during the Gold Rush. And finally, we looked at 2 different themes, the conflict between civilization and wildness, and the individual in the group.
This will be a good time to bring up the vocabulary that we brought up at the beginning. And I will read the words out one more time. They are wild, domestic, pack, sled dog, harsh, to beat, resilient, and self-reliant.
And that brings us to our homework.
Samantha, I've enjoyed many of the responses that have come in from our lessons, and I find reading them suggests new ideas to me as well. So,
yes, I completely agree. Your homework submissions have been incredible, and it's a great way for you to participate in our lessons, so we have this back and forth. Keep them coming.
On that note, here is our question of the day. What makes a good leader? Use examples from the book or from your own life.
Be sure to submit these to englishbookeducation.co.uk/homework. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we can't wait to see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Have a great week.